Hello and welcome to the Single Girl's Guide to Life, your weekly guide to single life living in your 20s and 30s. And for those of you that may be new to the podcast in this new year of 2022, I'm Chantelle the coach, a quarter life and confidence coach for single women so that they can embrace their single life, they can sort it out, they can feel like they're owning their lives rather than constantly trying to chase the things that society says we should chase. And what I aim to do is help to develop a community to do that. We have the Single Girls Club where we read literature that sometimes supports personal development, living alone, being alone, and bettering ourselves, and we then share that in a book club every month. We have monthly discussions, and it's just a place to have somewhere to talk about the struggles that you're experiencing, whether it's in dating and living alone. So there's lots that goes on, and the podcast is just another part of that. And then there's the coaching that you can do with myself, of which, if you're listening to this at the time of release, at the start of January 2022, we've currently got the Sort Your Single Life Out program about to start in a couple of weeks' time. If you are listening to this later, there is probably some sort of workshop, event, coaching program, whether that's group or one-to-one going on, that you can get involved with if you wanted to. There's so much on offer, and the podcast, if it's brand new to you for 2022 and you're starting off by learning about new things, developing something, then this is a great one to start with. Because this week I am talking about values and how values can allow you to lean in and live that single life of yours for 2022. If you've been with me for part of the journey before, then you'll have experienced what December was mostly talking about, which was getting ready for 2022, making it that year of you, which goes alongside the journal, and just really stepping into that. And to do that, you need to know your values. Values are one of those things that sit amongst your outlooks, your beliefs. They're going to be different to everybody, although there's research that suggests that they're kind of categorized within certain areas and that there are particular rankings of how important they are across cultures and across communities. And there's a bit of a scale, but each individual person has these elements of life that are important to them. And it varies from person to person how important they are and how they compare to being important in someone's life. And being able to tap into that is important for you to take ownership of your life. Now, it's difficult because when we're deciding what we want to do, there are so many different elements to that. Values is just one part of it, but you've then got this idea about, well, what will they think? And what should I do? Moral ideas, the pressure of your friends, family, or those that you're deciding on this action to. And Simon Sinek talks about this as the paradox of being a human in some regard, when you have to decide in teams more so when you're going to operate on the basis of yourself and your self-interest and when you're going to operate on the basis of the benefit of the group. And he talks from a kind of leadership stance of leading a team, and when at times you're going to sacrifice your own family life for work, and when you might have to sacrifice the work project for your family life, in the specific example he gives. And this can come back to the experience that we have at the moment, which has been used in the pandemic, which is the idea of, do you put your own mask on first before looking after others, or do you look after others first? And in the context of a very literal putting your mask on, if, an aeroplane accident is about to occur, you follow that guidance and do that first. The context matters. In the sense of the pandemic, we're considering, do we get ourselves vaccinated first so that we're protecting ourselves before we're then protecting everyone else? We know then the effect of mutations, or the idea that mutations forming is the bit that threatens us. But at the same time, we know the mutations, if they're surviving, are generally less strong because of the way they survive. And, that's very aside from single life, but we have these all the time. And then it comes back to the decisions you make based on the beliefs you have and the values that you hold strongest to you. And if you then look to work out your values, you can operate in a way that's truest to yourself. I literally, just this minute before recording, watched a video on TikTok where someone was explaining that You are the only person that was with you when you were born, and you will only be the person with you at the very end. Like, at both ends, okay, yeah, you've got your mother, and there was probably someone greeting you as you were born, but realistically, you are the constant in your own life. And there's been a Matthew Hussey clip of that as well, which I've shared on TikTok too, who's there for you throughout. When we're trying to live a life and be happy, which is just not a myth, but it's interesting to see what people describe as happiness and how far we aren't actually distracted by fulfilling society's norms. I think that's interesting to me as to how we actually achieve success, contentment, peace, happiness in terms of what you decide that is, and it isn't predetermined by others. But trying to achieve that and make sure it's truest to you is important, because as we've grown up, we've experienced all this sort of semi-conditioning that needs to be experienced as we grow up, all the influences we get, and we don't know what we're going to get when we arrive here. But at some point, and this is where the quarter life crisis comes in, which I love to talk about, we realise it's maybe not the influences that we had that we want to follow. And I think that the values element is the part in which you can take those words, those nouns, those adjectives, and decide what is most important to you. And by coming up with a list of 3 to 6, any more than that, you're really going to give yourself too many. Or if you do it, then you've got to rank all of them. And there are lots. There are lots that can be grouped together. And I think that's important to understand. But our values help us to make decisions and live a life that is true to what's most important to us. So let's take a really obvious one. Some people's top value could be family. It could be the most important one to them in the world. And so that means that you are going to probably make that time for your family on a regular weekly basis, if not more. For some of you, it will be speaking to a parent every day, or making sure you speak to one family member every day, a different one, or it might be that consistency. Now, for someone else, that might not be the case. It might be so far down on their list that they don't speak to their family all too much, whether that's all the members, a couple of the members, or they just don't keep up that level of frequency. And it's interesting because once you know your values as well, you want to know what other people's values are. It's not important that they are entirely the same. It's important that they complement each other at the very least. And in the context of dating or relationships, you'll probably find that you want a couple of them to be the same and you want a couple of them to be different, because you each want your own individual identity within that, but you also want to be able to, I imagine, form a life together. And if your values don't match up, such as the family one, let's take that example. Imagine if the person you're dating has such a strong link to their family and you don't. You're going to possibly find it hard when they prioritise family over certain things, when they spend a lot of time on the phone speaking to someone and you don't. Or vice versa, if you're the one with that family element, you might want that person to come along to, over time, come along to more family events, to be the person to, no, they don't have to come every time over to your parents' house with you, but you'd want them to be there a few of the times. And if that's just not important to them, it's going to later down the line show up more so. Unless there are other ones that strongly match over and it's just that one that differs, a little bit comparably. You're looking at how does this match? And I think this matters with friends, because you want to come out of friendships having gained energy. You don't want to necessarily feel drained. And there's an element of that within introversion and extroversion, actually, how we get energy from people. And I think it also matters, as we know, with work, because that's the idea that we feel aligned to what we're doing. And for most of us, work is probably the biggest part of our lives, because if you have a 9 to 5 and you're doing that 5 days a week, of all the time you get in the world that isn't sleeping, that's a big chunk. There's not lots of other time around it. So to not be in alignment with your work values and your own values, that must feel conflicting and maybe the element of purpose, or really feeling that you have that meaning behind you, comes up. And I have this. It's obvious with the move that I've just made in terms of I've decided to leave a secure teaching job. For what reason? Good pay, holiday, as apparently everyone tells us. What is it about my values that made me make that decision? Because decision making is where values is one of the strongest. Instead of overthinking and being worried about what you're doing, when you have to decide what to do, whether that's on a big scale like choosing to leave a job, or just do I go to my friend's party this evening, you have these 3, 4, 5 things that are the most important thing to you. And if you are living by them, then you can't go wrong with yourself. And I'll go more into that in more detail in a minute. But rather than stewing over should I, shouldn't I, rather than going to a ton of people to say, what do you think I should do? What do you think? And you do it once and you get an answer, and either you're not sure about the answer that they've given you, or you don't trust that person to give you the answer based on your best interest. Chances are they've said what you don't want to do, and because they haven't said the thing that you want to do, it's made you question it. But then you're like, but they said I should do that. Like my mum said I should do that, and I don't think I should, but she knows. She probably does have my best interest there. It's really hard. I end up becoming more and more confused the more people you ask, because you only end up with either a real strong weighting, which may be against what you think instinctively you want to do. You may be lucky. You might have the people in your lives that just tell you to go for what you think is right, which is one of the best things they can do. Because whilst advice from other people is great, we should learn from other people's mistakes rather than making all of them ourselves. There are mistakes that others have made that if we did them would be a very bad ending for us. However, when it's something like this, yes, they may have had their experience, but their experience was whenever they had it. And you've got to do what's right for you. My old boss was the best person. I wrote it in my New Year's Eve message to him. As I do most years, I send messages to people that have had a really big impact on my life and summarise what's gone on. And within it, I definitely mentioned, thank you for always being the person that just said, you've got to do what's right for you. This is the person that I had to tell that I thought I wanted to leave, and eventually did, when we have such a close friendship, not just a work relationship, a friendship at work. Imagine the personal response that he had, and he expressed that even still, but imagine that, and then being able to go, you've got to do what's right for you, and then ongoing for however long the period of time of leaving was to give those words of encouragement. And that's what I call a friend. And I don't know what value, I value authenticity, I guess, but friendship in that sense, and that to me is what friendship is. Within every value you give yourself, you've then got to define what that really means to you and what it looks like in a practical sense. So one of my values is connection, and I encompass friendship, relationships, and having deep connections with people within that. And so looking at what really makes those things up, you go into it in a deeper sense once you've got your surface level ideas. But the idea of leaving is one of the ones that I haven't always been able to decide on what the word is. That happens. I've got 4 kind of concrete ones, and then there's this 5th one that's always a bit ambiguous, but it has elements. And I think the word is autonomy for myself. It was vitally important that I left a job, and it didn't matter that it was teaching. It would have been any job that prescribed to me the time that I had to be in, that gave no flexibility. And I know some people are at the other end listening to this going, that's pretty much every employed job that you have. Yes, is the answer to that. But I know that I have to go and try something to learn from it myself. Like, can I make it work? Is it really what I want? I say this and I need to try it. I am of the opinion, which is different to a value, I'm of the opinion that you need to know and try it for yourself in order to really know. I would rather have the experience and fail at it than to never have had the experience at all. And that's a belief, that's something that I live by. I wonder what value that would fall under. challenge, trying something new, which probably falls under my value of growth, right? Growth is one of my other values. So you can hear here how deep this can go if you want it to. And if you've not really thought about them before, don't stress that you don't know them. This is not a one-off exercise. It takes time, and you can see that I even was refining my fifth one, because autonomy, I always toyed with, was it independence? Was it that I wanted to be on my own? And that's not true. I wanted the autonomy, the ability to make decisions for myself without having to consider basically anything, which maybe would have been a good thing to realise before I entered into a marriage where I didn't know about these things and we didn't have the discussions. And I'm very wary of what I expect from a relationship now and dating. How far do I want to be involved in that person's life, and how far do I want to have my own freedom? And that brings up the question of, would I ever live with someone? It feels quite stressful. So you have all of these things. So the first thing is that it stops, or it helps to reduce the overthinking by not having to ask lots of people, because you know what you're operating from and where the importance is for you of those values. It then empowers you to start taking responsibility for your own life. Linked to asking lots of people, you can't then come back and go, well, you told me to do it. If you are operating from a point at which you know what is the most important thing to you, what you want to be trying out, what you want to have a go at, then you can't look at anyone else and say, you told me this, or I should have done it that way, or they did it like that, so I had to do it too. When I share things on the podcast, on TikTok, on Instagram, wherever it might happen to be, within coaching, I'm not ever telling someone that they should do it my way, or that they should do the exact thing that I did. Because I do the things that I do based on what I believe in. And it applies in the context that I'm applying it to. And everybody has to operate from their own baseline. What works for me is not going to always work for everyone else, which is why coaching is so powerful. Coaching doesn't give lots and lots of advice of what you should practically do. It questions you as to work that out for yourself. That's the whole point of coaching. Coaching is strictly helping you find what you think's right for you, but doing it in a way that makes you consider alternatives, know what you really want, and to dig deep between why you might be holding back on certain things if it seems like you do want to try, but it's the obstacles that are in the way. That's what coaching's very good for too. And that's what I used to do as a teacher too. Yes, I do have a vested interest to try and get them the best grades as possible, but when they're thinking about where they want to go on to in the next part of their life, I'm not going to give any prescription as to what that looks like for them. I've gone through a very academic route. I'm also going through a bit of a creative route, potentially risk-taking in that sense of quitting a job. And there would be solid advice to give children, such as, well, you could do this and get a job and stay in it. We know that's not necessarily the case anymore. Lots of people mixing it up. Times change, society changes, but it's allowing everyone at any given stage to make the decision for themselves. And it won't always be the best decision in terms of the outcome. It will have been, though, the best decision for you, because you won't necessarily regret that you didn't stay true to yourself. Hey, if you learn that your value wasn't accurate, like if I learn that autonomy is not the most important thing to me, or one of the most, then maybe I need to rethink. Maybe it's going to turn out that social interaction and community, based on what I've moved into, is more important. Or is it that they are both important and I'm not then following a route that allows for both? You know, it's all these kind of elements. But knowing them, making decisions based on them, taking ownership for what you do is so helpful. And it gives you that established sense of self. Like, you know what you're about, and you know why you said no to going to that event or to that work party, or why you said no to that project, because it didn't offer you the autonomy. If we go back to one of mine, it didn't give you the creativity, or it wasn't going to give you enough time for yourself. And when people question you on it, because this always happens if you make any change in your life, if people question you on, why have you done that? Why would you do that? That's a stupid move. because you get people doubting the things that you've done in your life. You have something to fall back on because you know why you did it. And they may have a little bit about them if you did ask them about it and you went against what they said. Oh, I told you not to. Especially if it doesn't work out. I'm sure there's some people that would revel in that. But you can always go, I was doing what I thought was best for me based on what I believed to be the most important things to me at the time. And that, when I say that like that, I think that's the most important bit, because we're never going to get things perfect. And what is perfect anyway? It doesn't exist, because there's so many different ways to do things. And achieving certain outcomes is not the way to a satisfactory, content and happy life. If you're constantly chasing something, then once you get to it, you're going to... And it's the principle of Happy, Sexy Millionaire. If you haven't read that by Stephen Bartlett, you can check it out on the website. We previously read that as a book club. He was after being a happy, sexy millionaire. He gives those attributes now. It wasn't quite the goals he set, but once he started achieving more and certainly making the money that he made at the time and continues to make now, he realised it wasn't really all about that. I think learning how to enjoy your day every day and using those values to consider your week, because I have slightly different daily goals and things I want to incorporate that aren't necessarily my strongest values. So for example, movement has become a very key daily thing. If you've been following on TikTok, you know that the gym is giving me some level of structure and a reason to leave the house. But it's not, I wouldn't say that physical fitness is a value of mine. It's got some importance because I think it feeds into mental wellness in general, health. But I wouldn't call that one of my values that I massively operate of. I don't know where that motivation for that comes from. It comes from connection. I didn't start the gym for the health and weight loss or anything like that. I joined the gym to give me a sense of self each day and leaving the house and making sure that I had micro interactions with people. So it came from the connection one. But it obviously is beneficial in other ways that are good. But that's not the reason that I signed up, interestingly. So as you head into 2022, whether you've been single for 2 weeks because things didn't go great over Christmas, or for 2 years, or for longer, the important bit is understanding that you can live your best single life now by knowing what's important to you and by living that out each day. And if not every day, then within each week, and incorporating that in. It's not an overnight task. I start this off with my clients each time. We run through an exercise to start evaluating that. We go through the stories. When I first start coaching someone, I've got to start to understand where this person's come from. What's their background and where are we trying to go, of course, as well. But we also have to understand what's important to that person. My values are not their values. Your values are not the same values as someone else. And it's important that they start to discover to them what is most important to them, and then having that kind of key to operate from. And once you do that, the overthinking, the trying to find people to help you stops. It is about you being responsible for your life and getting a stronger sense of who you are and what matters to you. You'll already have ideas about this. Some of them will be so obvious, and then there'll be others that you're like, oh, I don't know. And the other times are these times when the values are like my fifth one was, you're not really sure about it yet. So you have to live more of life and come up against decisions and situations in order to determine them. And that obviously, quitting my job seems to suggest that it's not independence, it's autonomy. It's the choice about what I do. You also have this time when they come up against one another. And that's where the ranking of them, the kind of scale of importance, becomes apparent. So you might be like, well, these are my 5. What's your top one? What is the one that you can't go a day without doing? And what's your second and third one? And why is that second and not third? And it will come down to scenarios. And it doesn't have to stay as a strict ranking, of course. We change and develop as people. If you're under the age of 25 or so, your brain has not fully developed anyway. So, chances are, until that age, you're not really going to know what you want to do necessarily anyway. And then you've got to spend some time working it out. And some of you are sat here in your 30s, maybe 40s, and haven't really ever sat and reflected on this. There's no late point, though. The minute you start, it's helpful, it's enlightening. And there's also going to be these times where you maybe do go against your values. Sometimes that doesn't work out. Like, why did I do that? It's what you're going to ask yourself the next day. Or at the time, if you turn up to something that you just knew wasn't a good idea. It didn't offer you any opportunity to live out your values. But there will be other times where you do look at that. I need to look after the group more than myself right now. Even if that's not one of your values, like, I need to be there for my family. Or I need to show up for that thing at work. And it will be the right thing to do. It's so subjective, it's so contextual. But for the majority, if you're trying to achieve this in 2022, of like making 2022 your year, make it the year of you, then this is one way that you can try out as a way of what matters to me. It's a lovely journaling exercise. It's a lovely ongoing one as well. Or if you want the help with that, then joining one of the coaching programs that comes up this year, whether it's the Sort Your Single Life Out program that starts in a couple of weeks, mid-January 2022, or one of the ongoing slots that will be available throughout the year for one-to-one coaching, then that's something that I can explore with you and push you to look into. And then we can also focus on some goals for that single life of yours as well. It's important that we make the most of this year. I don't know what's going to happen. The pandemic is just going to continue. We never really know what's going on with it. But we're gonna make the most of it as a single community, as the Single Girls Club, as part of the Single Girls Guide to Life. You are gonna smash it this year. And I hope that that's given you something to think about as you would probably have returned to work this week and people have started to do New Year's resolutions. I don't do resolutions, I'm just about goals. I think resolutions to stop or start something point blank is very difficult. I think you have to build things up, which I'm sure I'll talk about in future podcast episodes. But until next week, everybody, keep thriving.